She kneel on my nail till I get a clue. Kneel the she, nail with the my, Alpis skell, Sulica celica, kneel the archaeological, El kneel the ma, cell, fervis, Samar Trion, arf, nal kneel, clue. As you might be able to guess, this is a video about NEILNAIL and her affinity missions. While I would absolutely love to just gush about her for a very long time because she is wonderful, as an archaeologist, her questline does bring with it a lot of new lore to the game, and as such, I will need to spoil all of XDE's story, including the new epilogue. So, you've been warned, and let's start talking about things, I guess. I know I say this a lot about Xenoblade X characters, but Neil is an example of one of my favorite tropes. In this case, scholar who seeks knowledge just for the sake of it and because it's fun to learn new things. The eagerness and raw curiosity she has, and even the chance of making a discovery that can then be shared with other people, is something I can relate to a lot, as you might be able to tell. If you haven't looked at all the dialogue options from her Heart to Hearts, especially the second one, I'd very much encourage doing so. Before the game came out, most of the Indiana Jones comparisons people were making to her were as a joke, but they are more apt than you'd think. Her second Heart to Heart gives you the option to ask either about her past travels or the clue system. If you ask about her past travels, she will say, "Well, as I told you before, I'm an archaeologist of cosmic civilizations. I've traveled across many light years and visited many star systems. But since my work focuses on civilizations that are, well, dead, I never really got the chance to speak to many locals. And tomb raiding space pirates aren't exactly the most skilled conversationalists. Speaking of tomb raiding, ruins would sometimes still be powered, and then you'd trip their security measures. Traps designed to deter robbers, autonomous defenses, I've had my share of brushes with death. Oh, and one time my ship broke down and I had to spend a few months on a deserted planet bushwhacking. Compared to all that, this is basically paradise. I really owe you guys my thanks." So not only is Neil just actively an action hero apparently, but she's been through so much in her only 28 years of being alive, by the way, that Mira is a nice comfy respite, not only because she's less in active danger in NLA, but because she's actually able to talk to people. Honestly, screw a Warriors game, screw a big dumb crossover, screw a Fire Emblem-like, screw a roguelike, screw Mystery Dungeon. The real Xenoblade spin-off we need is a Tomb Raider clone starring the adventures of NEILNAIL before she made it to Mira. You'd play that, I'd play that, don't even deny it. It's no wonder she's so interested in human civilization and old Earth culture. For all intents and purposes, humanity is very near extinction, and you could pretty reasonably say the civilization it had on Earth is gone and never coming back in the same way. But imagine being an archaeologist interested in such a civilization and still be able to talk to humans who were alive when that civilization was still around. All of humanity must be a treasure trove, not just so she can actually get social interaction, but because it makes her job so much easier and gives her so many more things she could potentially learn about us. The things about humanity she's interested in, and the reasons she's interested about them, also can tell you a lot about her own background. Neil's first Heart to Heart is about recommending a book for her to read, so she can learn more about Earth culture. This makes a lot of sense, especially post-Earth's destruction, where the line between archaeology and anthropology is very thin and blurry if it exists at all, but the interesting thing is, she's not interested in reading a novel because she knows she can learn more about humanity from their literature, but because she's unfamiliar with the concept of a novel in general. She says, "Isn't it just so creative? I mean, fabricated stories, read for entertainment. What kind of mad genius came up with that?" And then you can completely ruin it by recommending her a trashy isekai, but let's not talk about that option. Qlurian culture seeming to lack such forms of entertainment, combined with the fact that it seems like they're very stodgy and close-minded, it's no wonder someone like NEILNAIL would want to get away and go exploring the universe for knowledge instead of discovering it at home, even if she's supposed to be, like, in charge of their entire society. Let's talk about that, and what we've learned about the Qlurians. It's extremely cool that just having the new data points of NEILNAIL going by the nickname Neil, and the character we know as Celica apparently having the full name Celica Sulica, we can tell exactly how Qlurians name themselves. Though they're written as one word, their names have two parts, with the second one being almost identical to the first one, except the first vowel sound is different. It also seems to be common that either as a nickname among friends or among non-Qlurians who might struggle to say a longer name, that a Qlurian will just go by the first part of their name as a nickname. Another interesting question is whether or not they're all female. Just because all 2 Qlurians we meet are women doesn't mean every single member of their species is, but there is compelling evidence that suggests it might actually be true. The first piece is the fact that they are born from an artificial womb system, so they are not naturally born. Now, does this mean that they are all clones of original Qlurians? Not necessarily. It's explicitly stated that every NEILNAIL is a clone of the original one, though even then, they can develop unique personalities and be wildly different. Case in point, how different our NEILNAIL is from her predecessors, to the point of some Qlurians considering her heretical, despite literally being a clone of the previous NEILNAIL. Celica says she comes from a line of acolytes that serve the High Custodian, which could imply that she is a clone of a previous Celica who is also an acolyte to a previous NEILNAIL, or that there is some sort of genetic succession thing, and the person who provided their DNA to the artificial womb to create Celica was an acolyte, and so forth back through history. Either way, the lack of sexual reproduction in Qlurians means that their society might not have developed the concept of having multiple genders, which tends to come from sexual dimorphism being a thing. And for the purposes of Earth humans, Mira's auto-translation just interprets everything they say using feminine terms because that's how they present relative to Earth customs. In the second Affinity mission, Neil says, "I'm tired of all this pomp and ceremony, leave the hierarchical stuff to the other girls," which very, very heavily implies that all Qlurians are women, but on other occasions she does use more gender-neutral language, like describing her entire race as a big family and not something more along the lines of a sisterhood, despite considering Celica a younger sister for the same reason she would probably be able to extend that to any other female Qlurian. There's also the fact that as Xenoform party members, Elle and Celica were always kind of made counterparts to each other in material from the original version of X. And in fact, the craftable version of their armor is Super Civilization attire for Elle and Elite Super Civilization attire for Celica, with those being gender-locked. So it is very, very possible that Elle's people are the male-only mysterious race associated with Mira, and the Qlurians are the female counterpart to them. The artificial womb thing also raises another important question. The Qlurians inherited technology from and worship Samar, but are they descended from them in the same way Elma's people in humanity are, or were they another creation? In spite of the cloning, in spite of the artificial womb, I am very, very inclined to believe that the Qlurians are directly descended genetically from the Samarians and are not just another one of their creations. And that is because all of the Samarian descendants look like humans. The only 5 races on Mira that look something like a human are humans themselves, Elma, the Qlurians, Professor B, who implies he might be a future evolved version of humanity, and Elle. And there are very good reasons to believe that all of them are connected to Samar in some way. Humans and Elma are a no-brainer. We're talking about the Qlurians right now. If Professor B is an evolved human, either directly from the future of X Earth's universe or from a different universe, then he's still probably descended from Samarians. And then there's Elle. Elle, who, as I mentioned before, is considered a counterpart to Celica, who has much bigger horns, but they're still horns, which we know the original Samarians did from some of Void's CGs, and also originate from the same point in the forehead Elma's little crystal things do. He also has pointed ears, something shared with Elma and Void, yes, but also the Qlurians. Now, their ears are furry and look like animal ears, but while I might be misinterpreting the design, I always kind of assumed Elle's entire body was covered in some kind of fine fur. Like, yeah, the light blue color is probably his skin tone, but based on the way his model looked, I always kind of assumed he had short hair everywhere on it, and then the darker blue longer hair on his head. Oh, and also the womb tattoo looking things on his outfit are kind of similar to the Qlurian face markings, and, well, there was an ancient civilization on Mira with heavy ties to the Qlu, and we don't know anything about what happened to Elle's people, and that old civilization was clearly not a predecessor to the Nopon. So if Elle is the last of the people who used the Oblivia Ring to terraform the planet, and who built all the ruins in Kaldros, then he may very well be just as Samarian as you or me. This is much less of a direct connection, but Void's final boss form in the epilogue does bear some similarity to some of the concept art for L's alternate form that never got used. So yeah, it is potential Samarian connections all the way down with that guy. On the flip side of this, other races that don't have that kind of connection to Samar don't look as human as any of the ones I've been talking about. While the Ganglion is comprised of a bunch of different races, many of which were enslaved, the High Command was directly created by Void. None of them look particularly human. The Zarubagans are very, very heavily implied to have been created by, if not Samarians, another humanoid race, and they do not look human in any way, especially when you can see the one guy who's unmasked in the Manon ship. And then, okay, Nopon, Orpheans, Milsadi, they don't look very human. Sure, Rothians are humanoid looking enough to be playable, and they do have fur and pointed ears, but Gajarg's body shape is so different, he's limited on what equipment he can wear, and Rothian noses look the least human out of any of the playable races plus Professor B. There are two other less important people to consider. The first of those is Reese, and obviously her and Dogon are supposed to be evil counterparts to Celica and Rock, and as such, she does look the most like a Qlurian out of anything. She has very pale skin, she has markings on her skin, her ears are the most similar to Qlurian ears, although they're much longer and just straight up split into 3 points. But yeah, she is by far the most human looking of the people who don't seem to be Samar related in any way. She also seems to actually be some of the original Ganglion, like not a conquered people or anything, but the original Ganglion race that was created by Samar, so maybe she was made slightly more in their image than anyone else was. I don't know. What I do know though is it really seems like she's a cyborg, and she has like cybernetic hooves instead of feet, so if we don't really know what her legs and feet actually looked like, maybe she did not originally start out looking as humanoid as she does here either. Humans, Elma's people, Qlurians, and El all have pretty regular looking eyes, just with different colors for the people who aren't human, and Professor B seems like he's evolved past the need to have regular looking eyes in the first place, but Reese's are massively different from any of those, having bright orange sclera and vertical slit pupils, so maybe that is another indicator she's not quite as Samarian as everyone else is. The next closest is actually the Definians, but they all wear helmets so we can't see what their eyes and ears look like, and they're shapeshifters, and they're also all women, and they consider a specific machine their mother. So if anyone is a real evil counterpart to the Qlurians, it's the Definians, and even then, you're able to make a lot of them have face turns, including somewhat fortune if you make the correct choices in side quests, so maybe they really are just long-lost sisters of the Qlu. On top of all of this, there is Celica's fourth heart-to-heart, something that was in the original game, where you can talk to her about a cat. In one option, you can ask if there were cats on Celica's world, and she will respond with, yes, just as we, implying Qlurians, look slightly different from humans, so did our cats differ slightly from yours. It is certainly a stunning and mysterious coincidence. Our worlds were so far apart, as you know, and yet they were home to two species as similar as yours and mine, as well as two cute cat-like species. Which gets very close to outright stating that humans and Qlurians are related in some way, but also heavily implies that it was not just humanity, but all life on Earth that was influenced by the Samarians, if other Samarian-related races also have their equivalents to non-sentient animals we have on Earth. On top of that, most of the organic creatures on Mira really do just boil down to a bigger, more monstrous, or more fantastical take on a species from Earth. So if all life in the Qlu system and on Earth had a single common ancestor, and the Qlurians also spread to Mira long before the game, it all just makes complete sense. Let's also go back to NEILNAIL's second heart-to-heart. In addition to asking her about her travels, you can also ask her about the Qlu system itself, and she will respond thusly, "Oh, you want to know about Qlu? I'll be so happy to tell you. You might think we're a bunch of recluses and nepotists, but Qlu is actually a truly wonderful star system. There's so much nature and so many different ecosystems, and the climate is so temperate and pleasant. According to old Samarian lore, we think the Qlu homeworld was the first planet they settled on in this universe. Oh, I wish you could see for yourself. But sadly, Qlu now strictly forbids entry to any outsiders. As a Qlurian myself, I wish I could do something about that, but sadly it's quite a deep-rooted issue. If we make the assumption that unlike Elma's planet, the Qlu system actually was in the same universe as Earth, this would imply that the Samarians first settled there when they arrived. Leaving behind a race that worships them but is also completely able to use their technology and seems to have a greater knowledge of them than anyone else in the universe, including the Ganglion, heavily implies to me that yes, Qlurians are a direct descendant of Samar. If they have Samarian blood though, why weren't the Ganglion going after them in the first place? Well, while Neil says they're not all recluses, the Qlurians do seem to enjoy keeping to themselves, and it really does seem like Neil is the only one to regularly leave the system at all. Even if the Ganglion were aware of their heritage, the Qlu would definitely be less of a threat than the complete wildcard that is humanity, especially if Void was directing the Ganglion to follow where the Ares went, and not just indiscriminately seeking out any descendants of Samar. Also, if the Qlurians worship the ancient Samarians, and their planet is the original planet they settled on, it might be a sacred place in some way, and the Samar Federation might not want to destroy it at all. Plus, if the Qlurians worship you, then they're definitely not about to use their DNA to erase the Ganglion off the face of the universe. Most importantly though, we meet Celica fleeing from Ganglion captivity, so it's not like we can even say for sure the Ganglion didn't raid the Qlu system in the first place. Celica escapes from Ganglion custody with Rock, who's a member of the Gower people, who were engineered by the Ganglion as servants, so she clearly was in their custody before coming to Mira. As another possibility, Qlu might have genuinely been too technologically advanced for the Ganglion to have easily taken over, another reason why they'd want to go for Earth first. Luxar recognizes the Trion barrier around the Lifehold core as something not seen outside the Qlu system. Its true origin is, of course, technology from Elma's planet, and they are a different Samar descendant race from a different universe, so it makes sense they'd get some of the same technology the Qlurians did. Either way, though, it takes Luxar in the Vita to break down the barrier. So if the entire Qlu system is guarded by stuff like that, and more advanced versions of the autonomous NEILNAIL skells we fight in NEILNAIL's affinity missions, ones capable of manipulating gravity and the flow of time itself, at least based on their time attack incarnations, I could see at least just the Ganglion wing of the Samar Federation having a lot of trouble dealing with them, and maybe only being able to capture a few people like Celica from villages on less defended planets. Another thing definitely worth bringing up is that yes, Luxar was unable to distinguish the Trion barrier created by humanity using technology from Elma's world from a Trion barrier created by Qlurians, which suggests that maybe NEILNAIL herself was wrong when she said there was Qlurian tech in the giant Oblivia ring. It might not have been literal ancestors of modern Qlu who made that technology, but yet another offshoot of Samar with access to similar tech from some unknown universe. Neil does directly say Qlurian tech is incorporated into its workings, and not that the entire thing is. So it's also completely possible that the advanced tech on Mira was not necessarily created by an offshoot of the same Qlurian people NEILNAIL and Celica are part of, but by a different Samar-associated race that happened to have inherited some of the same technological innovations the Qlurians did, and that the NEILNAIL skells making it to Mira was a completely separate event from whatever caused the traces of Qlurian tech to show up there. Those skells are autonomous, but operate on an AI based on the personality of a previous incarnation of NEILNAIL. The very same NEILNAIL that was seeking out traces of Qlurian tech on Mira, also finding it at the Oblivia Ring and the ruins in Caldros. So if the flesh and blood present NEILNAIL makes that mistake, it's very possible the digitized memories of the previous one did the same thing. Does this complicate things unnecessarily? Perhaps, but it does also raise an additional layer of mystery and add in another potential civilization we could still encounter in the future. Granted, NEILNAIL is the real archaeologist out of her and I, and her theory when looking at the Oblivia Ring is that it was ruins from one of the civilizations the Qlurians gave their Samar-derived tech to at some point in the past. But even then, I think we can all agree that that civilization eventually died out and led to El, and why does El look like a dead ringer for a Samarian descendant if he's just the descendant of some people the Qlurians converted into worshipping old Samar? Also, how did the founders of the Miran civilization, with their giant terraforming ring by the way, and the NEILNAIL skulls get to Mira in the first place? As far as we know, Mira is located in a completely different universe from the one the Qlurians originated in, and as far as we can tell, the only people who came from that universe specifically into Mira's universe all were transported there the moment Earth was destroyed and took the rest of the universe with it. So then, how did NEILNAIL skulls from the past and thousands of years of civilization get to Mira from the same universe? It's pretty easy to guess that if the Miran civilization was just a group of people who were bestowed tech and Samar worship by ancient Qlurians, that a NEILNAIL of generations past would have just left a couple NEILNAIL skulls with them to help defend these new converts and maybe give a jump start to their own tech. But that still raises the question of how they made it to Mira millennia before Earth's universe was destroyed, and in an intact enough state to build a civilization that seems to span all 5 continents and had a genuine capital with a royal palace. That's another thing. The Mirans were an empire, or at least some kind of monarchy, which is somewhat different from how Qlurian society is set up. Yeah, the NEILNAIL clones are always the actual leaders, but even then, it seems to be a lot closer to either a theocracy or a first among equals type deal. And remember, Neil says that she is unable to get the Qlurians to start letting outsiders back into the system. She very blatantly does not have absolute power. Yeah, things can change over thousands of years, but it also does seem like the current Qlurian system has been in place for millennia as well, so it does seem like they didn't bestow their entire societal structure on people they preached the glory of Samar to. The one thing that appears to be a traditional Qlurian belief that Neil definitely agrees with no hangups is a commitment to non-violence and facilitating the growth of civilization and life using their technology. They're not purely pacifists, of course. Luxar recognizes the Trion barrier, and both Neil and Celica are perfectly willing to fight as long as it's in either self-defense or for the protection of others, but they don't go out of their way to commit violence. And a very interesting piece of dialogue happens if you console Neil during her first Affinity mission when she mentions that the terraforming device was turned into a weapon. She will say, "That's sweet of you. You're a kind soul. If only everyone were like you, maybe then history would have played out differently." This could mean a lot of things. Like, obviously, she's referring to a terraforming device on Mira being turned into a weapon and making Oblivia the harsh desert it is, but it seems like there's more behind those words. She's not just talking about Mira. Is she just being more general? Civilizations across the universe are always destroying each other in pointless wars? Or is she referring to the history of the Qlu themselves? While it seems like she has ample reason to want to go and spread her wings, we don't actually know why Neil left the Qlu system in the first place, and maybe it was some sort of military tragedy she was unable to prevent. They were going out there spreading their faith across the universe, so there's a good chance that ended up becoming ugly. That being said though, the universe has been destroyed. It's very likely that Neil and Celica are the only Qlurians left. This is probably a less dire situation than some of the other races though, as I'm certain Neil has the knowledge to at least partially reconstruct the original artificial womb, and at the very least make more NEILNAILs in the future. So I'm not super concerned about the future prosperity of the Qlurians or anything like that, but I also have to wonder what Neil's reaction as an archaeologist to being one of the last members of her people would be. At the same time though, she also says, if you are always chained to the past, you could never look to the future. And we Qlu must rise above our past if we're to soar once again through the infinite beyond. Which leads me to believe that, yeah, she'll take a record of everything the Qlurians used to be, but not necessarily choose to emulate them when she rebuilds their society as the first in a new line of NEILNAILs. I might also be reading a little bit too much into that dialogue, but I kinda think that she might already have an inkling that she's one of the last remaining Qlurians by the time she says this. It's wistful and yearning for a brighter future in a way that doesn't really match up with just her being the leader of an isolationist civilization that she wants to get to open their borders. She talks about the entirety of the Qlu rising again in the future, which doesn't really match up with her describing them as prosperous at the beginning of the first mission. This has led me to probably the most interesting realization out of this entire video. In spite of 2 full affinity missions, I don't think NEILNAIL's character arc is done. I might just be coping a bit because I've been a big Celica fan since 2015, and Neil is also a wonderful character I want to see more of, but I could genuinely see her getting upgraded to a main party member in the next X game. Like, yeah, we've arrived at a new planet in a new universe, and it's very likely that everyone's going to be settling down there and trying to build a society, but also, the White Whale 2 is an interstellar-capable ship, and it's not crashing like the original Whale did. They will have access to other planets if they so choose to, and something tells me the cosmoarchaeologist is not going to want to just stick there on one planet for long, especially if there aren't other civilizations to get to know there. The Samarians are pretty clearly being set up as a potential major player in the future, and I can't think of another character who's as invested and as interested in learning more about them than NEILNAIL. While Elma, Lynn, and Al are probably always going to be major characters in any direct follow-up from the original X, I would not be surprised if such a sequel rotated out some members of the main cast to bring in other characters who have open plot hooks or unfulfilled arcs in. Like, I could easily see Mia being upgraded to main cast, especially if they ditch the Avatar going forwards. And while Yelv's cliffhanger was not followed up on in XDE, which, don't get me wrong, I was not expecting it to be, he's an optional party member who has DLC in the original Japanese version. They could easily turn uncovering the J-Body conspiracy into a main source of internal conflict within humanity in an X2. Despite what I've been saying so far in this video, and I do think most of it is correct, there still isn't an explicit in-stone explanation of where L came from and why he's like this, but in another future game, do you really expect such an explanation to come from L himself? He does not seem to particularly care about any of that kind of thing. So, in addition to the Samarian stuff, in addition to the Qlurian stuff, in addition to how people got from Earth's universe to Mira long before everyone else did, the actual L explanation is more likely to come from NEILNAIL investigating things than it is L himself in the first place. I'm not confident enough to completely call my shot and say that all 3 of the brand new characters introduced in XDE exist specifically as foreshadowing for things later down the line, but I would not be surprised if Neil, as well as Liesel and Al, have very important roles to play in the future of the crew of the White Whale 2. I certainly hope the clue will once again soar through the infinite beyond, and I hope even more that us as players can help these 2 women achieve that. Until next time, this is Luxon, signing off.